Welcome to Donington Park for the Radical European Masters, a triple header this weekend around the ever popular Donington Park Grand Prix circuit, one of the fastest, most flowing tracks in the UK. So a look then at how they line up with James Littlejohn in pole position from Riccardo Dona. Then we've got Marcello Martiotto, Andrew Ferguson clear of Brian Caldwell and Martin Verity. Starting at the back of the field, but sure to make progress, is Alex Kapadia. And also Jim Booth has gone very well this year in his Spider. Two classes, of course, in the Radical European Masters. There is the Masters class, the RXC Spider, and the SR8s, and then the Supersport class for the SR3 RSXs. Both classes well represented at Donington Park this weekend. A rolling start behind the pace car, of course, for the Radical European Masters is James Littlejohn, who'll start from pole. Riccardo Dona shares the front row with him. Then is Marcello Martiotto and Andrew Ferguson on row 2 from Brian Caldwell and Martin Verity as we get ready for the start, waiting for the lights to change, which they do now, and away we go. Great start from the back of the field from Alex Kapadia. Not unsurprisingly, Littlejohn leads away into Redgate corner. Behind him, Andrew Ferguson. Martiotto also looking to try and make ground 3 wide further back. They just about all sneak their way through before plunging downhill through the Craner curves for the first time of asking. Also a good start as well from Brian Harvey. He is in the black 64 car, tucked in just behind Kapadia as the cars work through the old hairpin before sprinting on towards Swans and then climbing up through Coppice and McLean. Non-surprisingly, Littlejohn stretching his legs ahead of the SR3 of Marcello Martiotto, with Riccardo Dona losing a little bit of ground early on in this first lap, but Martiotto clear of Andrew Ferguson, then the fast starting Kapadia, and then some great scraps going on behind amongst the Supersport class runners. So they all jostle position in these early stages, and particularly Yanni Herpia in the black 17 car applying all sorts of pressure to Martin Verity in the red and white number 25. There is the Spider of Jim Booth, who slides to the inside of Brian Caldwell, but Caldwell looks to fight back, and they've got Faisal bin Laden just behind them as well. So they head into the Melbourne hairpin for the first time. This is the relatively recent extension, so to speak, Donington Park. But this is the most recent section of the circuit, added in 1987 for the Motorbike World Championships, as Dona swings through Goddard's back onto the Donington Park National Layout as Brian Harvey makes the mistake, runs a little bit wide through Goddard's. He's going to lose a little bit of ground. So Littlejohn leads the way. Then we have got Martiotto already up into third place. Alex Kapadia, Jim Booth sides the inside of Brian Caldwell into Redgate. And given the absence of too many lengthy straights, particularly in the context of this Radical European Masters season, we've got the opportunity for quite a lot of parity between the Supersport class cars, which have got incredibly high cornering speeds, and the Masters class cars, which are very, very quick in the straight line, maybe a little bit less agile through the corners due to the additional weight that they carry. Riccardo Dona, there he is, car 3, has been one of the front runners in the Supersport Championship this year, and he is really doing battle for the championship alongside Martiotto and Chen Chetty, as cars climbing out through Coppice and McLean's and on to the back straight, down to the Fogarty S's. Second place already gained by Kapadia. The battle is the one going on behind us. Jim Booth looks to make the move to the inside of the Finnish driver Yanni Herpia, and he goes past him. Great move there from Jim, the American who travels from the States for each and every round. He is one of the most improved drivers in the championship this year, and he's getting quicker with each and every round. But look at this fight behind as Caldwell launches the inside of Verity and to the inside Yanni Herpia, and that's almost 3 places in one move gained by Brian Caldwell. Faisal bin Laden tries to make ground behind. There's contact. Herpia comes together with Martin Verity, and Verity gets fired off into the Armco barrier, and that's a big instant for Martin Verity. All a little bit unnecessary as well in the early stages of the race. No such concerns for Andrew Ferguson. He does battle with Martiotto. Martiotto taking advantage of the ability to brake very, very late, able to repass as somewhat tentatively Martin Verity clambers out of his slightly battered SR3 RSX, and that was a safety impact for Verity. Very disappointing for him, as at the front of the field Littlejohn continues to lead. Second place is Alex Capaldi. Then we've got Andrew Ferguson in third. So 3 of the Masters class cars. Then we've got the Supersport class lead shaping up very nicely between the red car of Maritiotto, the black and silver car of Riccardo Dona. And Dona, having maybe been a little bit more tentative at the start than Maritiotto, is now really coming back to the Swiss Italian. Maritiotto, who did previously race in the Masters class prior to the enormous accident he had at Spa a couple of years ago, returning to the championship in the SR3. Then Brian Caldwell has got Brian Harvey behind him. Yanni Herpia continuing on his way, but unfortunately we've lost Bin Laden and Verity. There's now a challenge for the Supersport lead as Riccardo Dona darts to these. Oh, there's contact between Dona and Maritiotto, and Riccardo Dona just chopped across Maritiotto's bows on the exit of the Melbourne hairpin. He's at 90 degrees to the oncoming traffic, and just about everybody avoids him, which is the most important thing, but he has lost an awful lot of ground, and that is going to be a huge disappointment for him. It means that Tyler is able to move up through the order as now Dona rejoins. So the Supersport class really being shaken up with 2 incidents in successive laps at the Melbourne hairpin, and Riccardo Dona, now with an awful lot of work to do, it releases others into the fray and others to enjoy the fighting as well. We're able to watch the good battle at the moment between Konstantin Gudkaev and Wesley Fonjny. Fonjny, who returned to the championship on the Silverstone Grand Prix circuit back in July. Konstantin Gudkaev, who's been sharing the car for most of the season with Ivan Lukasevich, and the pair of them have been something of a revelation immediately at the front of the Supersport class. Brian Harvey recovering from his earlier dramas. A little bit of dust being kicked up by Tyler as he climbs up the hill, but again, not a huge concern there for Peter Tyler as he runs now on to the back straight. This is the only opportunity really for the drivers to stretch their legs, but compared to somewhere like Spa, we've raced earlier in the year with 1.5 kilometre long straights, the corners at Donington Park come in very, very quick succession. And now the fight between Gudkaev and Peter Tyler continues through the Melbourne hairpin, then sharply uphill on towards Goddard's to try and challenge Peter Tyler. At the moment, no joy for the Russian driver, so he remains as he was, but he now looks to try and draw alongside Tyler as they run towards Redgate. Now, deceptively, the car on the outside has actually got a better opportunity at Redgate as around the outside goes Gudkaev, and the reason for that is the right-hander really tightens on exit, and you want to swoop in wide, claim the apex, and then let the road feed you downhill through Hollywood, the Craner curves, and on towards the old hairpin, which of course is anything but that. Fast swooping right-hander, then onto the left-hander uphill at Schwantz. And already Gudkaev beginning to ease clear of Peter Tyler. It's always a little bit tricky to overtake, particularly in the Supersport cars, because the braking distances are so short. Even if you're maybe a second a lap or so quicker than your rival, you've really got to try and hustle the mistake out of them. That's what's happened. Gudkaev and now Peter Tyler looking to stay in his wheel tracks as already the Russian looking to line up another move down the back straight. That's Brian Harvey who comes under pressure. That's Yanni Herpia who is able to make the move on Harvey as they head on towards the Melbourne hairpin. Meanwhile, here is the race leader, and that is James Littlejohn, who's led every lap of the race so far, as we would have expected, starting from pole position and able to ease on his way. Meanwhile, Harvey in pursuit of Yanni Herpia. And they've got Peter Tyler just behind them. Then we've got this battle between Brian Caldwell, who is beginning to be caught by Yanni Herpia. Herpia, of course, recovering from the incident earlier on. Meanwhile, the Russian has faded a little bit. Running wide again, Peter Tyler kicks up the dust on the exit of Redgate. And Jim Booth now coming on to terms with Marcello Maritiotto. And this is something of a trademark we've seen really from Jim throughout the course of the season. He just lets the race come to him, stays out of trouble in the early squabbles, and then is able to steadily climb on up through the order. And Booth looking to make the move. and gains the place fairly easily in the straight line past Maritiotto. Maritiotto looks to fight back into the Fogarty S's. No way through though for Maritiotto, and Booth, provided he doesn't outbreak himself into the Melbourne hairpin, should be able to make that move stick as he sets off in pursuit of Andrew Ferguson. Meanwhile, Yanni Herpia has caught Brian Caldwell as the pair of them run down the straight over the bump in the road where the Dunlop Bridge used to be, and Caldwell absolutely on the limits on the brakes as they swing through the S's. And don't forget, this is a mandatory pit stop race in the Radical European Masters, and what that means is that between 25 minutes and 35 minutes into the race they've got to come in. Oh, and more contact, and that is Yanni Herpia who tangles with Brian Caldwell, and it's Caldwell who loses out. He gets passed by several of his rivals, Brian Harvey and Peter Tyler amongst them, and they really are struggling at the Melbourne Loop stage. It just seems they're not quite giving each other enough room on the exit. Also regaining ground is Ricardo Dona, who was victim earlier on. Now, looking at Yanni Herpia's car, I don't think he's picked up any damage, the Finnish driver, so that shouldn't cause him too many issues, because as we were saying, they've got to make that mandatory pit stop, and in many instances there's going to be a driver change, such as for James Littlejohn to hand over to Tony Wells, and Littlejohn, if anything, has now got the benefit, in fact, of, well, I was going to say clear track and not too much pressure, but Alex Kapadia, you can see in the background behind him, and he's now getting in amongst some of the slightly slower Supersport runners. Wesley Fongenay, his first target. Fongenay making a long overdue return to the series as Yanni Herpia's got Brian Harvey chasing him down, and Peter Tyler busy doing battle with Ricardo Dona. And again, Tyler just kicking up a little bit of dust, using every inch of the road, possibly a little bit more than that. But it's not delayed him too much on this lap, but Dona, as you'd expect, probably going to be a little bit faster, given the turn of pace that we saw from him in the first couple of laps before that contact with Maritiotto. So the pair of them jink through the S's as Ricardo Dona looks to draw alongside, and he moves clear of Peter Tyler. Good move that from Ricardo Dona. Can he get it done on the downhill run into the Melbourne Loop? Yes, he does. Now Tyler will immediately slip into the clutches of Brian Caldwell. There is the bright red car of Caldwell. And Ricardo Dona at mid-race has got the very quick Stuart Mosley to hand over to. Mosley, who has raced really at all levels of the sport, up to and including the Le Mans 24 Hours, will be able to move that car somewhat up the order. That said, the class leader, Marcello Maritiotto, he's got the very rapid Marco Ciancetti waiting in the wings, and Peter Tyler is another of the two driver efforts. He's got the former FIA Formula 2 Championship racer, Tom Gladys, who'll take over from him as Caldwell looks to close up onto Tyler through the Craner curves. This is a fairly tricky sequence of corners, just because you're putting lots of aerodynamic load on the cars as you go. Meanwhile, Harvey and Herpia in the two almost identically liveried cars, black cars and black helmets. Very hard to tell the pair of them apart. And we've got Ricardo Dona. Then we've got this fight between Caldwell and Tyler, and this is not what James Littlejohn will be wanting to catch, as well as he gets into the traffic. He's the next car to arrive on the scene. He's got Alex Kapadia homing on his tail, and he's now got these dicing Supersport runners just ahead of him. In terms of time check on the race, well, we're rapidly approaching the pit window, and that's the point where everything could start to get turned on its head just a little bit, as Harvey looks to line up the move on Yanni Herpia. Runs wide at the Melbourne hairpin. Melbourne hairpin, so named because it heads out towards the village of Melbourne, also was not in that original position, but was a characteristic of the 1930s Donington Park Grand Prix circuit, before the circuit fell into disuse, really, heading to the Second World War. Only opened on the initiative of Tom Wheatcroft back in the late 1970s, and then extended, as we said earlier on, in 1987 for the Bike Grand Prix event to get up to the required minimum distance. So there is Caldwell and Tyler. They've both been lapped now by James Littlejohn. Then behind the pair of them is Alex Kapadia, and Kapadia and his co-driver Man Halalos, really the principal championship rival to James Littlejohn and Tony Wells. Kapadia, who raced at Le Mans 24 Hours last year, actually made it through to the finish despite a fairly challenging event. He's also been seen in the European Le Mans Championship of late and is one of the very, very quickest drivers out there. Meanwhile, race leader James Littlejohn is another driver who is increasingly a go-to name, having raced both contemporary sport prototypes in the European Le Mans Series, but also was a star at the Monaco Historic Meeting back in May when he was running third place in a classic march before it all went a little bit wrong mechanically. So Capardi is siding his way through the traffic, over the crest in the road, in towards the Melbourne Loop. Ricardo Donut behind him, looking to follow, imagining Littlejohn's wheel track somewhat in the recovery drive. Meanwhile, Caldwell has got Capardia chasing him. Then the gap back to Peter Tyler. Capardia able to dance the inside Brian Caldwell as they run through Goddard's. Another lap reeled off, and now it's the Herpia and Harvey battle, which Littlejohn must contend with. And this is not the ideal part of the circuit either to catch them, because through the Craner Curves, Old Hairpin and up to Schwantz, there aren't any hard stops, and therefore Littlejohn's got to be a little bit braver, as he is now. Down through the Craner Curves, swoops around the outside of Yanni Herpia. Can't quite make the move on Brian Harvey through the Old Hairpin, but the team will be showing him on his pit board that through the traffic, Capardi has been getting ever closer, and therefore Littlejohn has got to pull the pin, got to try, if he can, and just ease away, and that is with good reason, because Littlejohn and Wells have got 15 success seconds. Capardi and Alos have actually got 25 success seconds on the basis of their results in the final race at Silverstone. So what that means is that essentially, provided the pit stops go without any hiccups, you can add 10 seconds to the gap between the leading duo, and that is how they're demoted post pit stops. But then Alos maybe a little bit got the legs on Wells, and now we are getting into the pit window. The drivers readying themselves for the pits to start, to get full of radicals. Now there is the school of thought: do you come in right at the start of the pit window and get your pit stop out of the way, or, as I'm sure will be the case with both Littlejohn and Capardi, staying out towards the very end of the pit window, get the maximum amount of mileage from the pro driver, and therefore giving Tony Wells and Matt Howells the best possible opportunity of a strong result. There's then the gap back to Andrew Ferguson in third place, and we've not seen an awful lot of Andrew just yet. The leading duo, perhaps as we would have expected, as the pit lane is now open, able to build a fairly healthy and comfortable buffer over the rest of the field. Now it's the turn of Capardia to begin to get his elbows out in the lappery, past Brian Harvey, down into the Old Hairpin. Picks up the throttle almost immediately, is in. Right at the start of the pit window is Marcello Maracciotto. That is to hand over to Marco Cenchetti. Maracciotto hops out. Cenchetti will place his seat insert into the cockpit first. Also in is Brian Harvey, and Brian is going to be handing over to Tom Harvey. That pit stop proceeding fairly smoothly, just a little bit of a check of tyre pressures. Also in to Ricardo Donut, and that is the thumbs up from Stuart Mosley. He is ready to get back into the fray, and it should be a great scrap as well between Stuart Mosley and Marco Cenchetti as Jim Booth rolls into the pit lane in the Spider. The Radical team signal him on towards his position. Tom Gladys has also taken over from Peter Tyler, so we've got a lot of very quick pro drivers out on track for the second half of the race, and they are going to be chasing down some of the gaps that were made by the pros early on. So Gladys enters the fray and actually comes out between the leading duo. So the first task for Alex Capardia is going to be to put the lap on Tom Gladys. Meanwhile, a top up of fuel, of course, for Jim Booth, and the Masters class cars needing to refuel, the Super Sports not needing to, but when they refuel, it does mean the driver has to vacate the cockpit. Now, a little bit of trouble there getting the fuel Bowser in, so that's going to delay Jim slightly as Cenchetti comes back out onto the track. Booth about to descend on his way. Oh, something has let go in the cockpit there for Jim Booth. It looks as if the fire extinguisher has set itself off. Oh no, it's more than that. There's licks of flame coming out from under the car, so all sorts of problems for Booth as he is going to need to vacate the cockpit fairly shortly. The marshals get to work in putting out those flames before they've really started to cause too many problems. Also into the pits, the Ferguson entry as Yanni Herpia comes in now. He's a single driver effort. So that means that he will just stay put in the cockpit. The same goes for the Russian driver Konstantin Gugkaev. But he now has that turn weight before he is waved back into the race. It was interesting there. You can see though that he was pointing to the front section of the car where he made that contact earlier on, just making sure that everything was as it should be. But the way the success seconds balanced out means that Brian Caldwell, with whom he tangled, has emerged just ahead of the Finnish driver, and therefore he's got to do that move all over again. Little John, meanwhile, the race leader, continues on his way. He is untroubled and unflappable. The wheel of the number 2 car. He'll be staying out right until the end of the pit window. Now, the way that it works in the Radical European Masters, as in comes Kapadia, is that the pit window remains open until the drivers go past the pit lane closed board. Now, Kapadia comes in to hand over to Alos. Now, this is really quite important for the race because it means that Little John is going to get a lap's benefit over Alex Kapadia. So that's good strategy for Little John and Wells as Alos gets the briefing from Kapadia. Alex just saying this is what the car's doing, these are the things you need to be aware of. As the fuel and seat insert comes out, Manhal gets strapped in, and Jim Booth, well, despite the drama with the slight fire, is able to rejoin the race as well. So that's good news for the American. As just to check the tyre pressures for Manhal Alos, as Kapadia gets to work strapping him in. And of course, with those success seconds, there's no need for the team to rush the pit stop. They don't need to do anything overly ambitiously with any sort of risk of jeopardising Alos's race. But now into the pits comes Little John, so he's gained that lap of an extra flying lap really over Alos and Kapadia can now see Little John rolling down the pit lane as James Littlejohn hands over to Tony Wells. First of all, there'll be a slight splash of fuel to go into the SR8 as Littlejohn gets out, the car gets earthed. Nobody except for the mechanic putting in the fuel can touch it whilst the refuelling is underway, and then the driver change can be completed. So now Alos rejoins, and essentially he is racing an empty track whilst Littlejohn debriefs Tony Wells, explains exactly what he needs to be aware of. And Tony, not surprisingly, full of concentration. And Tony, one of many drivers in the field who's come up through the Radical Motorsport ladder, been raced initially in the Clubman's Cup, then switching to the UK Championship before making the step up to the Radical European Masters. He's also gone to the level beyond that as well, racing in the European Le Mans Series alongside James Littlejohn on a couple of occasions over the past couple of years. So Littlejohn fires up the SR8, rolls down the pit lane. Now, where is he going to emerge via V Manhals? The answer is with a nice healthy buffer, because Alos comes out of the Melbourne hairpin as Wells leaves the pit lane. So we're going to have essentially the length of the start and finish straight here as an advantage over Manhal Alos. And that could be absolutely key for Tony Wells. Will he be able to hold off Alos then over the remaining 25 minutes or so of the race? First of all, though, Wells has just got to get to grips with what the car's doing. It's always tricky when you take over a car that have probably got this compromised setup to suit Tony a little bit, to suit James Littlejohn a little bit, as Yanni Herpia launches the inside of Stuart Mosley. I think Stuart's going to take too long here to dispatch the Finnish driver, unless, of course, he's carrying a little bit of damage on that car from that contact from Ricardo Donor earlier on. But Mosley has got the right line into Redgate Corner, swoops around the outside of Yanni Herpia, and now runs off through Hollywood and down through the Craner curves. A fair amount of chasing, though, to be done for Stuart Mosley, because he's got Tom Gladys, Tom Harvey and Marco Cianchetti all to contend with. And all that ground that Donor lost earlier on, plus the success seconds, some 30 or so, that Donor was carrying in the pits. Meanwhile, Jim Booth and Brian Caldwell continuing to do battle. But we're just looking a little bit precarious on the brakes into Goddard's, and that is rewarded with having to really just make a snap correction in the car. As now Harvey being caught by Alos. This is to put a lap onto Harvey. But at the moment, Harvey not inclined to make life too easy for Alos. In fact, I think that could be a battle for position by the time the success seconds are worked through. So Alos has got a little bit of ground to make up. Stuart Mosley likewise, but Mosley taking over from Ricardo Dona. He'll know the car was involved in contact earlier on. He'll know that the car has done best on a 60% race distance. Therefore, the tyres will be feeling a little bit worn out as Harvey puts up no opposition to Alos, who swoops through. And Alos off in pursuit of Tony Wells, the race leader. So far, this has been exactly what Tony Wells and James Littlejohn would have hoped. A very straightforward run at the front of the field. No pressure really to Littlejohn from Kapadia. And now it is up to Malhals. Can he do anything about Tony Wells? At some of the other European circuits, it has been Alos with maybe a couple more years' experience in European competition who's been able to be a little bit up on Tony Wells. But here at Donington Park, this is a track that Tony knows very, very well. And so Alos might be in for a slightly tighter battle. Now, this should be a good fight amongst the Supersport class front runners between Tom Gladys and Marco Ciancetti. Gladys in the fluorescent yellow and black car. He's got the red machine of Ciancetti just behind him as they run past the pits in towards Redgate Corner again. Through the right-hander, and then just kicking up a little bit of dust there for Ciancetti before he heads downhill through the crane of curves. The road falling away all the while. And they swoop round the old hairpin and then kicking through the left-hander at Swanson towards Coppice and McLean's. Now this could be very handy, I would suggest, for Tom Harvey. It's Harvey who is currently leading the Supersport class, and as Gladys and Ciancetti are going to do battle with each other, that's going to allow Tom Harvey possibly to maintain a little bit of a buffer, because necessarily if you're defending your position, you're not quite taking the optimal racing line. You're giving away a tenth or two of a second here or there around the lap, and that might just allow Harvey to maintain the advantage he needs, particularly in the SR3 RSX, which is kind of such a short braking distance. When you've got drivers like Gladys and Ciancetti know every single trick of the trade, but Ciancetti looks to the inside of Tom Gladys as they turn through the Melbourne hairpin. That was a great move from Marco Ciancetti, really bold, as now he's clear of Gladys. What can Gladys do about fighting back at the Italian? Well, already Ciancetti trying to stretch his legs. He's gained a couple of tenths of a second on the run through Goddard's. The start and finish straight in towards Redgate. Gladys not quite close enough to challenge. Now Ciancetti needs a good smooth run out of Redgate through the crane of curves just to try and shake away the toe from Tom Gladys. Meanwhile, Stuart Mosley about to claim another victim. Brian Caldwell, though, defends the line as he's perfectly entitled to do. There's a battle for position into the Melbourne hairpin. Caldwell, though, consulting his mirrors, waiting to see what Mosley does. Mosley, not unsurprisingly, therefore deciding to hold station, see if he can force the mistake from Caldwell, which is exactly what happens through Goddard's, as Mosley gains the place on Brian Caldwell, who we saw a few moments ago was just struggling a little bit to get the car turned into Goddard's. That kicked him even wider than on the previous occasion, so Mosley gains the place. Now the safety car would seem to be getting ready. Now what is the reason for that? We haven't seen anybody stranded out on the track just yet, and certainly the safety car boards don't seem to have gone out, because Mosley and Caldwell doing battle. Now the safety car board goes out as the lights on the safety car go out as well. So just as the marshals are signalling the drivers to slow down, whatever the obstruction was seems to have gone away again. As they go past that marshal's post, the safety car, the waved yellow flag is there as Alos closes onto the tail of Konstantin Gudkayev. So essentially we've got almost a virtual safety car situation with the waved yellow flags around the circuit and the safety car board, which means the drivers should be measuring their pace. They certainly can't overtake each other, but at the same time the safety car's not being scrambled onto the track. So Tony Wells coming onto the tail of Ferguson there. You see the safety car, which has clearly been stood down. We've not seen anybody stuck in the gravel trap either, but the safety car boards remain out, and Wells would be expecting in a safety car situation to see the safety car as the race leader on the road in front of him, but that's not been the case, and now it would seem as if those yellow flags have been retracted, because Wells gains the ground on Ferguson, moves clear, and is able to get a lap over the rest of the field. There is confirmation, the green flag. So a somewhat strange situation. Now the big loser from that, I would suggest, is Manhal Alos, because he was trapped behind Konstantin Gudkaev, and Gudkaev in the Supersport car wouldn't have been able to run at anything like the pace that Ferguson or Wells would have been able to do. And so Tony Wells has probably taken advantage of that situation to, yeah, he absolutely has. He's gained 5 or 6 seconds over Alos, so that possibly makes this something of an insurmountable challenge for Manhal Alos to come back onto terms with Tony Wells. There is the race leader. And Wells, as we are getting fairly deep into proceedings, just about 10 or so minutes left in the race, is now in a very, very nice position to claim the race victory. Certainly, that period of wave to the flags has helped him to sneak a few seconds, just at the point where Alos was looming slightly larger in his mirrors. But now, as we follow Wells along the start and finish straight, there's no sign of the second place man, Manhal Alos, in the background. So around Redgate Corner and down into the Craner Curves for the race leader Tony Wells. Where is Alos? Here he comes now, and I make that the best part of 15 seconds or so that Alos has got to try and gain, and even if he's doing that a second a lap, he's probably going to run out of time. Jim Booth now has been caught by Stuart Mosley. This is going to be slightly harder going for Mosley because the Spider is an absolute rocket ship in a straight line. The Supersport class car quicker through the corners. Mosley will be maybe hoping that by this stage of the race, Jim Booth has had the best of his tyres and will start to struggle for understeer, but you can see how quickly the Masters class Spider pulls clear of the Supersport SR3 RSX along the start and finish straight, and then down through the Craner Curves. Mosley might be able to gain some ground here on Booth, particularly with Booth got the appetite, he hasn't really got the appetite to push too hard through the Craner Curves. Meanwhile, Chen Shetty in amongst the traffic, you can see the ground that he's now gained over Tom Gladys, and Marco Chen Shetty isn't too far adrift now of Tom Harvey in the fight for the lead of the Supersport class. Jeremy and Andrew Ferguson currently on course for a very solid third place, albeit a lap down on the race leader Tony Wells. Wells into Redgate once more, and absolutely dominating this race, James Littlejohn and Tony Wells. And it's been that sort of year for them where just everything they needed to swing in their favour has gone in their favour. Long overdue run of good luck, and it's one that is looking ever more likely to propel them to this year's Radical European Masters crown. But we've still got racing to go, of course, at Monza and in Jerez, as now Marco Chen Shetty closing up onto the tail of Tom Harvey. This is the fight for the Supersport class lead, and Chen Shetty, having dispatched Tom Gladys, has been on something of a chase. The success seconds serving to give us a little bit of a grandstand finish as the pair of them head down the Craner Curves and then around the old hairpin. Chen Shetty, lovely shot there into the cockpit. The driver just looking several corners ahead, and that's really the key. The driver wants to be ahead of the car. They want to be thinking about what's going on up the road ahead of them, as Chen Shetty just his way through Coppers and McLean's. The road tabletops out on to the back straight, the longest straight on the circuit, but it's still over and done with fairly quickly into the heavy braking zone of the Fogarty S's. And now Chen Shetty has got his prey within sights, but is also rapidly running out of laps here because we are getting very close to the closing stages of the race. Chen Shetty, is he close enough to challenge into the Melbourne hairpin? He certainly gives thought to it instead. He'll look to get the good run out of Melbourne on towards Goddard's. Now, is he going to make a little bit of a look to the inside here of Tom Harvey? Harvey sees him coming. Chen Shetty looks to go for the move and darts to the inside. That's a well-judged move from Marco Chen Shetty, who gains the place and the lead of the class. Harvey looking to fight back with immediate effect as the pair of them turn through Redgate Corner. Now, the run down through the Craner Curves, the chance for Chen Shetty just to gain a little bit of ground. So this is looking fairly secure for Marco Chen Shetty. except, of course, that there was that contact earlier on in the race involving Marcello Maracchiotto over at the Melbourne hairpin, and there's the possibility of that car picking up a penalty as a result of that investigation. So therefore, all of this effort from Cencetti may yet be unrewarded, and that would be very disappointing for Cencetti. Meanwhile, he's got the advantage over Harvey as they jink through the Fogarty S's. Over the crest in the road, down into the Melbourne Loop. Here, meanwhile, is our race leader, and this, for Tony Wells and James Littlejohn, is going to be yet another triumph in the 2016 Radical European Masters Series, as for the final time around the undulations of the Donington Park circuit for Tony Wells, and I think that he and Littlejohn will have thoroughly enjoyed this, because you always want to win a race. Sometimes you want to win it spectacularly, but sometimes a day where you just dominate the opposition can be equally rewarding as well. So Tony Wells runs into the Fogarty S's for the final time of asking, and he jinks through the chicane, over the crest in the road and down towards the Melbourne hairpin. He's just got these two heavy braking zones to be safely through, and we've seen time and time again here at Donington Park, race leaders getting it all wrong at Goddard's final time round. Just because the left-hand hairpin, the road does fall away, it's easy to outbrake yourself, it's easy to get a little bit caught out, and Wells makes sure there's no such mistake. So Tony Wells and James Littlejohn take the checkered flag and claim victory in the first of the three races this weekend at Donington Park in the Radical European Masters. Second place is going to go the way of Manhal Alos and Alex Kapadia, but Alos unable to really close up to Wells late on, finishing some 12 seconds adrift in the event. Nonetheless, solid drive, and for Cencetti and Maracchiotto, well, they're going to win on the road, but they have picked up a penalty for that contact earlier on, and that means that Tom and Brian Harvey are going to essentially claim Supersport class victory as a problem for Jim Booth late on. So Cencetti and Maracchiotto, slightly bittersweet, but nonetheless they have done enough to secure third behind Tyler and Gladys once we get onto the adjusted time. So look at it then for the provisional result, as on to the podium for Jeremy and Andrew Ferguson. Runners up, Kapadia and Alos. And race winners Tony Wells and James Littlejohn to the top step of the Donington Park rostrum. All smiles from Wells and Littlejohn as the trophies get handed out. Paul Brown, the championship coordinator, doing the honours. But still plenty more racing to come at Donington Park this weekend. Race 2 coming up shortly.
It ran very smoothly, but then there was that safety car, the virtual safety car.
Yeah, it was very confusing, that, wasn't it? I wasn't quite sure what was going on. There was lots of yellow flags in places and then not in others. So, I mean, I just followed Jeremy around, so that was very easy.
I got out, there's an SR3 in front of me, and we weren't catching the back of the snake. And I was wondering, where's the safety car? Where's the safety car? So he's going slow, I'm going slow. And all this time, there's a space building up between us and the car in front. So, yeah, it affected us.
So a very exciting start to the weekend for Radical European Masters. Race 2 coming up very shortly.